Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here for what we think is a very important announcement. My name is Joe Garcia. I'm the president of the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. I should say I'm the new president. Many of you may know my predecessor, David Longenecker, who was in this role for 17 years and has presided over these events several times. I want to introduce just a few people in the audience who have been incredibly helpful here. First, from the College Board. Because the College Board and ACT have been the supporters, not just of this report, but previous reports. And frankly, without their generous support, this would not have been possible. I'm going to ask in a few minutes the Senior Vice President for Research, Jack Buckley, to come up. But before he does, I want to introduce the study's co-authors. And first, I have our Vice President of Policy Analysis and Research at WICHE, Dr. Demi Michelau, over here. And next to her is Peace Brandsberger, who is our Senior Research Analyst, also in Policy and Research. And also from WICHE, helping support this event are Christina Sedney, Laura Ewing, and Colleen Falkenster, and I want to thank all of them. Now from the College Board, again, I mentioned Jack, but we also have Jose Rios, who is the Director of Multicultural Communications, and Ellen Sawtell, who's the Executive Director of Analysis Services, and with her is Robert Hargrove, the lead research database statistician. Up here, panelists who are going to be joining me, and you'll be hearing from in just a little bit. Patty Barth, directly to my right, the Director of the Center for Public Education at the National School Boards Association. To her right is William Sirata, the President of El Paso Community College in Texas. And next to him is Dr. Nicole Smith, Research Professor and Chief Economist at the Georgetown University for the Center on Education and the Workforce. And we're here, of course, to talk about our latest Knocking at the College Door report. Before I make the presentation, I'd like to invite Jack Buckley to say a few words. Jack?
Thank you for coming and also join me in congratulating the team at WICHE in a fantastic report that you'll hear about in a moment. So, you know, by sheer coincidence, yesterday I was meeting with the Deputy Minister for Education of Afghanistan. And his questions were all about, this is not much to do with the College Board, but in another life I used to run the Federal Statistical Agency for Education. And his questions were basically, how do we make one of those? How do we create a national government agency to understand education? And a lot of us, if we've worked in this area for a long time, you immediately think about, oh, you know, ESSA, and how do we change, you know, assessment, and how do we get down to all these complex constructs that we're trying to measure, large-scale research. But the most important thing that any kind of statistical agency in this area can do, or anyone who's trying to collect and understand these data, is counts, is descriptive statistics. How many kids are there? How many teachers are there? How many schools? Are they changing? The denominator, as folks in the industry sometimes call it. If you don't know what's on the bottom of that fraction, anything you're telling a policymaker about changes is completely, you know, or could be completely erroneous. And in fact, small changes in those denominators turn a happy story into a sad one, make a policy triumph into a policy failure. And if those denominators are not accurate, we have no idea what's going on. And so while the panel today will spend a lot of time talking about trends that are very important to the nation in terms of what our workforce will look like, what our stock and flow of human capital will be, whether or not we will have a population educated as citizens and able to fund our retirements as we move into that phase. I would just put a plug in for the importance of this report and reports like it for the basic understanding of simply how many students are there getting diplomas? And with those denominators, our ability to understand everything else, right? Without that foundation of descriptive statistics, we simply don't know what's going on. So thank you again for your hard work on this. I know I'll use it as I have and as the team has for many of, you know, again, as the foundation for what we report on a monthly basis. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Well, I'm going to try to move through this quickly because we want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Let me also start by asking you, if you are going to tweet about this, please use hashtag Knocking2016. So let's take a look. What do we have? What are we going to show you? What's new? Just a reminder of what the report is about. It's projections of high school graduates, the overall numbers. It's not about graduation rates, although, of course, the rates affect the numbers, but it's projections for public and private high school graduates. And for the publics, it breaks it down by race and ethnicity. And we think that's critically important for colleges and policymakers to understand as well. Although WICHE is a regional organization, this is a national report. We do break it down by regions because, as you might expect, there are significant variations among regions. We also have it broken down by states, including the District of Columbia. And for the first time, we now include projections for Guam and Puerto Rico. Now, as I said before, this isn't the first time we've done this. We've done it every 4 years or so for about the last 40 years. The data we rely on is the Common Core of data from the National Center for Education Statistics, but we also look at the number of births by state, broken down by race and ethnicity, to help us, again, make the long-range projections. So let's look. What do we really know? We know the big news is that the overall number of high school graduates will plateau for most of the next decade. In fact, for 7 out of the next 10 years, we're going to see essentially no growth. Now, as I said, it varies significantly by region. And really, when I say the next 7 to 10 years being flat, that's actually the good news, because after that, we see a significant decline that we all need to be thinking about. So here's what this shows us. That we've been, as you can see to the far left, we've been steadily climbing since about 1996, when we were at 2.5 million graduates. We're shortly going to be right about 3.5 million, and then we're going to be steady between 3.4 and 3.5 million up until we peak at about 2024. So again, what we're going to see is, while it looks flat, there's a lot behind that flat curve. And really, the issue is that we're going to see a dramatic change in the mix. That is we're going to see the number of white students, white high school graduates, is going to decline, but that's largely going to be filled in by the growth in our Hispanic population in particular, and by our Asian population to a lesser extent. And we're going to see, frankly, our African American population is also going to be pretty flat. So let's look at what this means overall. So what this tells us in the lighter shaded area is the numbers that we have that are actual. And as you can see, the blue area, the biggest, represents our white students. And at the beginning there in 2000, that's about 70% of all students. But by the end, as we see that area getting quite a bit narrower, we're really talking about just over 50% of our graduates are going to be white graduates. And the big growth is in this green area. This is our Hispanic students. That's where we're going to see the greatest growth. And again, by the time we get to the end of our projections, we're going to be near a tipping point between our majority and our minority students. So let's look individually at each of the groups. This is, in some ways, the most alarming slide. We see a pretty significant and steady decline in the number of white graduates from our high schools around the country. And in fact, by 2025, in fact, even when they're at the peak, we're going to see about 110,000 fewer white graduates of high schools, of public high schools, than we do today. And by 2030, it gets much more alarming. You can see we're down about 250,000 white graduates. That's a total of about 17%. Now, as I said, we're going to see some upticks that are going to be filled in by the Hispanic population. So the Hispanic population, it has been growing. It's going to continue to grow. And we're going to see it increase over the next 10 years by about 40% to a high point of almost 920,000 graduates by 2025. But then, just as with our white graduates, we're going to see a decline. Why is that decline? It's because, frankly, there's been a greater decline in birth rates among our Hispanic population, a greater decline than among any other group. That's the sharpest decline of all the demographic groups. As I said, our Asian groups are going to continue to grow, but on a much smaller base. So we're going to see about an increase of about 57,000 net gain in terms of our Asian students. That's about a 40% increase. So this is Again, a pretty good number, but it's really only about 7% of the combined total. Now, I mentioned African Americans. And again, not at the significant declines we've seen with our white graduates, but we're not seeing growth. In fact, we're seeing a decline in overall, for the total period we're talking about a 6% decline. And generally, the numbers will hover around 450,000 graduates for the next 15 years. Now, as we look at our Native American population, again, very small numbers overall, only about 1% of the total. And as with our African American and our white populations, we're going to see a bit of a decline. Not quite at the same rate, but certainly going down. So here's another key finding, is that there's significant regional variation. We have two of our regions. Let me show you those regions. Our Northeast region, off there in the blue, is facing a decline. Our Midwest region is facing a decline. Our Western region is facing a slight increase, and our Southern region is up overall. So let's look at how those shake out. Of course, the top line is our Southern region. Again, all of them have a little bit of that peak around 2025, but the Southern region is the only one that shows significant growth. And in fact, what we're going to see is that they are going to produce far more graduates than any other region in the country. And it's partly fueled, as you can see again, by growth in Hispanic students. They also have the decline in the white students, but they have growth in Asian and growth in Hispanic students overall. Right now, the South produces about 43% of all high school graduates in the country, and that's going to increase to 47%. The West, again, similar in that we're going to see significant growth in the Hispanic population, decline in white students, and again, slight increase overall. They're going to be about 30% of the total throughout the projection period, but we're really expecting, again, a decrease overall where they're going to drop back to about 784,000 total graduates by 2030. The Midwest is not quite the great story. What we see is modest growth among our Hispanic students, not nearly the increases that we see in those other two regions, and yet we see a continuing and even sharper decline among white students. So what that means overall is that where the Midwest generated about 22% of the nation's high school graduates, that's going to decline. They're going to decline by about 93,000 down to, about a 12% decrease overall between 2012 and 2030. And the Northeast, similarly, doesn't benefit from the significant growth of the Hispanic population, so the white population doesn't really have that offset. And so we're going to see a decline of about 11 percentage points overall in the Northeast region. Now, what does that mean in terms of the states that produce the most graduates right now? So we looked at the variations, and these are the top 5 producers right now of high school graduates. California is a bit of a surprise, I think, for a lot of folks. That's been a steady growth for a long time. But by 2032, we're going to see a decrease in the number of high school graduates in California of 13.5%. Now, overall, we're going to see in Texas, on the other hand, a 17% increase. Next biggest producer, New York, decreasing by 5.5%. Florida up a little bit, slightly. And then Illinois down a very significant amount, 18.7%. So again, those are our top 5 producers today. And then the other very interesting story is that the number of students graduating from private high schools will decline significantly. In fact, that decline has already started, and we're going to see it continue. There's a lot of reasons for that. We know that private high schools had about 76% or more of white graduates, white students. 26% of the students were white. As we see a decline in the number of white students, we see a decline in the number of students enrolling in private schools. We also, again, surmise that it may also be due to, we know there are far fewer religious schools, certainly Catholic schools in urban centers than there were 30 years ago, and there are far more public school options. Charter schools, for example, are now an option that didn't exist before. So we're going to see that significant decrease with that little same bump that everybody else has. So if you want to learn more, we have an online tool. Here's the website for it. Remember, again, the hashtag Knocking2016. But if you go to the website, you'll again see the breakdowns by state. You'll see the trends in each state, and you'll see the trends by race and ethnicity, which we think are particularly significant. Now, why does this matter? We think we need certainly to increase the number of students of color graduating from high school and enrolling and successfully completing a post-secondary credential. The challenge for our colleges and universities is that the growing populations are the ones who have been less likely to enroll in college, less likely to complete college, more likely when they do enroll to go to the open access institutions, to the community colleges. So this is a matter for those students as we try to redirect, remind institutions that they need to focus on these populations, that this matters not just to those populations. For those populations, for students and families, it's a matter of increasing equity and opportunity. But for our economy, for the fact that we need to be producing more college-educated workers to meet workforce demands, this is a matter of economic competitiveness and sustainability of our economic recovery. And then for colleges and universities, frankly, especially those that are already facing declining enrollment or flat enrollments and have excess capacity, this is a matter of survival. They need to figure out how to reach out to these populations. So I'm going to turn to our panelists and ask their reactions to this report. I'm going to be asking them some specific questions, and I'm going to invite you to ask questions when we conclude with the panel. So first, let me start with Patty. What is your reaction overall to these numbers?
Okay. Thank you, Joe, and thank you for a really excellent report. This is really, really important work, and it's not something we see often. Our first reaction in K-12, and if anyone in here covers K-12, you know that one of the good news stories in public education last few years are the increasing high school graduation rates. We are at an unprecedented high. Most recent data, 82% of our high school students in public schools graduate on time. That's in 4 years. And if you include kids who stay another year or two to graduate, that could add another 3 to 5 percentage points. All right, so that's really phenomenal news, especially when you consider that the biggest gains are being made by Hispanic and Black students, so we're also narrowing that gap. What this report tells us is that this is no time to pat ourselves on the back because when you look at the denominators, right, we're doing better. We're doing actually a very good job at graduating more kids. It's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to get enough kids into college. It's not going to be enough kids to go into the workplace for these high-skilled jobs that we need for the future. So what does that tell us? Well, the optimist in me says, okay, one thing is that we know a lot of what works now, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in the results in higher rates. So we need to continue doing those things that work. We know from research what are the early warning signs that an individual student may be in danger of dropping out. And we can identify those warning signs as early as late elementary school. We have the data systems to help us do that and provide those interventions, and I think we're seeing some of the results from that. We've also, in our high schools, especially, we're doing much, much better at integrating rigor, high-level content, with relevance in the terms of modernized career technical education, hands-on opportunities for kids, and that benefits both the students who do want to go to college and those who just want to go into the workforce. They're much better prepared for either eventuality. We're doing better at providing supports for teachers, creating professional learning communities so that they can reflect on their practice and be more effective in their jobs. And in addition to providing more opportunities for kids to get more support. So all of that is happening. It's not happening enough. So we have to do more of it, and we cannot do this alone. This is pretty clear. We need to start investing more. We've done a good job, but we need to invest more in high-quality pre-kindergarten. I mean, we look at this, these projections. Those kids, where we start hitting that decline, those kids are entering our schools now. So we have to start immediately to make sure that they're ready and prepared when they get into elementary school. We need to reach out to other governmental agencies, do better about integrating family and child services where the children are and their families are, so we can support our children. We looked at the demographic change. We talked about more diversity in our schools, but we also know that the incidence of poverty are increasing too. And so we have children with challenges that we need to support. And a lot of partnerships can help. I don't want to take up the time, but I do want to say that there's a lot we know that works. It's not easy to do. If it were easy, we'd have 100% high school graduation right now. We don't. But we can do it if we get enough support resources focused on making sure all kids graduate.
Great, thank you, Patty. I'm going to warn you that I'm going to come back to you and ask you about teachers and what post-secondary partners can do to increase diversity and make sure that we're providing effect and training effective teachers. So we'll come back to that.
We have enough time?
President Sirata, what's your reaction?
Well, good morning. What an honor to be here, and thank you, President Garcia. Kudos to the authors, Peace and Demi, for doing a tremendous job. First, I guess my reaction is I'm very thankful that I live in the South and that I live in Texas. But at the same time, I certainly understand the challenges that are ahead, and I think that much of what we're looking at, this is a roadmap that your team has produced for us and has continued to produce for us. Prior to serving in this capacity, I served as a vice president for student affairs and enrollment management. So this publication has been, it's somewhat of the Bible for enrollment managers and has been for quite some time. But what I find is that institutions still are unprepared to deal with the changing demographics and the reality of population declines in certain parts of our states and nation. The collaboration with K through 12 is paramount. It's something that we've been working on in El Paso and that we're known for nationally with regards to the partnerships that we have with K through 12. I certainly agree that I believe college begins in kindergarten. It begins in pre-K, but until we have pre-K for all, I believe it begins in kindergarten. And it really speaks to the fact that we need to ensure that we're collaborating as soon as elementary school and pre-K to create that college-going culture and then to create a college graduating culture. You don't reap the benefits of higher ed unless you complete, unless you finish that degree or certificate. And so it's not good enough just for them to go. We need more to go. And it also is a wake-up call for many of our states. So as proud a Texan as I am, third generation on one side, fourth generation on the other, our state, we only have 54% of our high school graduates going to college. In El Paso, we outperform the state with 55%, but the national average is 69.2%. And so we need to compete with the nation. We need to make sure that more of our students do go to college. That also allows other states to come in and recruit students from Texas because not enough are going to college as it is. And then we have to help them be successful. I see colleagues in the audience, and it's always good to see good friends in the audience, but I see colleagues who have dedicated their careers to facilitating Latino student success. Sarita Brown in the audience and her team on proven practices of helping this growing demographic be successful while in post-secondary education. I see my colleagues from AACC who over the last 12 years, we've really focused and changed from just being very proud to be an open admissions institution with high expectations for the students that we serve. I've yet to see a student rise to low expectations. And so we have to have high expectations and really not just focus on access, but access with success. And then I think that my colleague and the work that they do, Dr. Smith and her team and Dr. Carnevale, is really laying out the importance of this. You know, one of the pieces that I continuously reference is a report that they did, America's Divided Recovery, that was just released this year, the college haves and have-nots. And the only pathway to the middle class is through higher education. We need to share that with parents and families and students themselves so that they understand that they have to go to college and complete college so that they can have an opportunity at the American dream.
Thank you, President Sirata. Dr. Smith, of course, we're always interested in hearing from the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. We know that there's been a lot produced over the last many years about the workforce needs. What's your thought, based on what you see, about the declining number of high school graduates going forward for now what looks like the next 15 years?
Well, thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I would like to extend congratulations and thank you to the authors for this really great job on telling us a little bit about what we should expect about college graduation rates. But I want to speak to the workforce in particular from three perspectives. So first, I'll start off by looking at some of the challenges that employers face today in finding adequately skilled workers. And one of the first things you hear employers say is that we are facing a skills shortage. You often hear about the skills shortage and the skills gap. And once we at the center, spend time trying to figure out, well, what is the skills gap? The skills gap really has to do with the distance between the credentials that our students are graduating with from higher ed and what they're expected to perform or what they're expected to know by the time they get to the workforce. So one concern here, at least from this particular report, is we want to make sure that we better connect our students who are leaving the K-12 system and transitioning to higher ed. We want to better connect them to workforce outcomes. And one way to do that is to ensure that we have counseling, a lot more counseling early on. I mean, some of the statistics that was shown earlier showed the decline in high school graduation rates for white America and the rise for Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans, and also a flat line so for African Americans. One concern for us would be, well, how do we deal with that? How do we ensure that the percentages that we get from higher ed will in fact adequately find themselves and be able to place themselves into the workforce? And really, what has happened in the past is that African Americans and Hispanics have had tremendous challenges with respect to graduating on time, tremendous challenges with respect to finding themselves in higher ed, and tremendous challenges with respect to getting a job that pays middle-class wages. I think we need to be honest here about how difficult some of these challenges are going to be, particularly as it pertains to making sure that we provide adequate counseling. I think one of the reports that we haven't spoken about yet today that were released at the center, looking at African American majors and Hispanic majors, pointed to the fact that many of the majors that our students of color pursue by the time they get to post-secondary are majors which in the long run often result in wages that are less than the median wages for that particular degree. So we're concerned about, if we see a preponderance and we see higher percentages of our students of color interested or finding themselves pursuing these particular majors, we want to make sure that there's a distribution that's much more representative of the population as a whole. So I would question, why are so many of our students following these majors? Why are they being counseled into these majors? And what type of programs are we creating so that they can see the world and see other opportunities besides, where they feel comfortable in their comfort zone? I think another challenge that we face is that higher ed schools today are becoming much more segregated in terms of the composition of their populations. So if you were to look at this high school graduating class and the high school graduating class of the recent past, you'd find that the vast majority of white students are, in fact, finding themselves pursuing higher ed in the 486 most selective colleges and universities in the country. And Hispanic and African American students in the majority are finding themselves pursuing higher ed at our open access schools and community colleges. Well, there are implications here. There are implications for the types of degrees that they have access to. There are implications for the level of attainment that they would pursue in the end. And there are also implications for what types of jobs you get later on. So my concern would be when we speak on equity and we speak about completion, and we speak about graduation rates, that we also concern ourselves with where students go and not necessarily that they only go. We know that by 2025 in our statistics that 65%, just close to 2/3 of all jobs will require some sort of post-secondary education and training beyond high school. So it's no longer just a high school diploma. Whether that post-secondary education means a certificate, a license or certification, an associate's degree, some college credits that you might have picked up in community college, or a bachelor's degree and beyond, irrespective of where that post-sec is, that's where the jobs are. So we have to make sure that once we train these students, we inform these students early on, not only do we tell them that they need to get a degree, but we honestly tell them that there are differences in long-term wage consequences for the types of degree they pursue.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And before we come back, let me follow up on some of those things. You mentioned the importance of counseling to ensure that first generation of minority students are picking majors, programs that will actually lead to living wage jobs. But if we don't have the counselors necessary to do that, what are other ways? What do you think about the tools that exist now to link labor market data, it shows earnings, to individual student records, so we can say a history major in their first year is likely to earn X, a business major likely to learn Y. Can that help create that awareness? What do you think of those programs?
We certainly don't have a dearth of data. What we do have is a lack of information. So we have so much data that's available, and the students themselves, on average, do not know how to process many of these, this information here. I mean, we've had many attempts to do this, and the most recent that everybody talks about is the college scorecard, which lays out all of these institutions and tells you many comparable statistics between them. But one concern is it just too much? Are our students able to process this? And without endorsing any one tool, one of the tools that we've looked at in the past is iBest, and I know if you in the audience would know about it, where students, early on, can figure out, what's your major, what do you want to pursue? I mean, there's a few studies that have demonstrated that the students who are most successful early on in completion are those that make decisions early on, that don't necessarily change from major to major, too much, because then you have all these extra courses and extra credits that you don't use. And also the students that are adequately informed through counseling. So I'm not exactly certain the extent to which just available data in the atmosphere is going to be sufficient to really counsel, especially first-generation students who may not have that, the cultural background to be able to take advantage of that data that exists.
Thank you. So, Dr. Sirata, you heard Dr. Smith talk about one of the challenges that so many of our minority students, our African American, Hispanic students, enroll at the open access institutions, more than half. That's completely different than for white students. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I mean, we do know that, of course, students who enroll at those institutions are far less likely to graduate. So is the answer to direct them more to the four-year schools or to improve outcomes at the two-year schools? What's been your experience?
Sure. So every time I hear data presented with regards to choice and the different degrees, I'm always thankful that I already have a job, since I have 2 degrees in English. And what we see, some of the data that I've reviewed with regards to this, is that we see the humanities and liberal arts, yes, they start at lower wages, but they catch up. And I think that's vastly important. We don't want to dictate that everyone needs to be in the STEM fields. And I'm a huge fan of the STEM fields, and I went to be an engineer and realize I had neither the discipline or desire to be an engineer 3 years in, much to the demise of my father. But we have to help students. So I think it's a combination of both. I think that students, and I see colleagues from Macro and Strategic Enrollment Management, we know what we call the golden circle of where students go to college. And it used to be, prior to the recession, it used to be about 100, 150 miles from home. It's now down to about 50 miles. Students choose to go to college or universities in about a 50-mile radius that we call in enrollment management the golden circle. And so it's not so much that they're going to be going off to all kinds of institutions. What we have to do is regionally improve the opportunities that we have. And so in El Paso, we have a wonderful collaboration with the University of Texas at El Paso that began as a mining and metallurgical institution. And so very much the engineering pathways, but we have to improve the outcomes of both our open access, and I'm proud that we have been focused on that. We're one of the 30 colleges that are participating in the Guided Pathways project through AACC in ensuring that students do make choices quicker, do declare a major, and do not take credits that will not apply towards their degree plan, so that they don't exhaust their financial aid, and ensure that they finish that associate's degree and then move on to finish a baccalaureate degree. We've been very focused on improving outcomes. Over the last decade, our enrollment has increased about 17%, and yet the number of degrees and certificates that we have awarded annually has more than doubled, from 2,300 degrees and certificates 10 years ago to 4,633 this year. So it's a concerted effort to focus not just on access, but access with success, and ensuring that students are successful.
Thank you. Now, Patty, you mentioned the increase in graduation rates at the K through 12 level. And as we know, we're facing flat and declining numbers of high school graduates, which will impact, of course, what happens at colleges and in our workforce. We know that one way to address that is to increase rates of high school graduation, increase rates of college enrollment, and critically increase rates of college completion. How can colleges, the post-secondary environment, collaborate with the secondary environment to ensure that more kids, more students are college ready when they graduate, that more students in fact graduate, and more of them choose to enroll in college?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, they could talk to each other more, would be the first step, and I'm very, very heartened to see that golden circle is shrinking that you talk about at 50 miles. What an opportunity that is. If you're a school district, you look at where your kids are going, I'm going to call Dr. Sirata and say, we need to talk. You know, how are our kids that you're getting from us? And let me tell you, this is what we
I'll give you my cell phone number right now as well.
I mean, just the data sharing would be really, really helpful. Just to get the college's view of how the graduates are faring, how many are in remediation, how successful are they in their freshman level courses. But also, we would get feedback back about, what are you looking for? What do you need from us? That's just the first step. I think there are so many opportunities for aligning those kinds of occupations that you were talking about. What are we preparing students for in our region? And can we better align the K-12 and the higher ed experience? Certainly that's true with teachers. Across the country, we have many, many districts, if not whole states, that are experiencing teacher shortages. And it's not that there aren't enough. In many cases, it's not that there aren't enough bodies of individuals wanting to go into teaching, but there's a real misalignment between the fields that we need to staff and the fields they're entering. So that's a perfect example of that, of how that conversation can better align how we're preparing kids for the futures that are actually out there, so that they can get good jobs.
So an open question for the panelists. You mentioned the teachers. We know that while we may not, I guess it's regional, have teacher shortages. I think at least in the rural West we do. Mm-hmm. But we definitely have a shortage in the number of teachers from diverse backgrounds who look like the students who are increasingly populating our schools. Do any of you have comments about how we can grow a more diverse teaching corps?
President Garcia, if I can respond to Ms. Barth's speaking to how we need to speak to each other. I'm very proud that we have the collaborative for college readiness in El Paso now in its third decade. 25 years, we've been really focused on ensuring that we're talking to each other under the leadership of President of UTEP, Dr. Diana Natalicio, creating this collaborative where the college, the university, employers, as well as the superintendents from the three largest school districts. And we do look at the data on a regular basis, and I'm proud to say that we've seen the college readiness, and we're seeing a stronger and stronger student produced by our K through 12 colleagues annually. We've made great progress with respect to that, and we do talk to each other and share the data in particular. So we know that 85% of our high school graduates from our 12 school districts that we work with in El Paso either go to El Paso Community College or University of Texas at El Paso, over 85% of them. And so we have shared that data so that we then work together collaboratively to ensure that we're providing those opportunities for these respective students so that they continue. And if we see hiccups or data or issues at any level, then we can turn around with our colleagues. And it's no longer a blame game. It's how do we get better together? Because there was that time where, well, if our students were only college ready, well, you produce the teachers that are teaching these students. It's really working together to increase the outcomes of the particular region, which we know if we increase the educational attainment level, then we're going to correspondingly increase the quality of life in this particular region.
So the question is, how do we, get a larger percentage of teachers or proportions of teachers that actually look like have the ethnic composition of the students that we're going to see in the future? And I think as an economist, I'm going to rely on my training to say we respond to incentives. And one of the the best incentives for getting a larger number of people in a particular profession is wages. At every point where there's a comparison of the United States outcomes to Europe, you hear people talk about, well, look, Finland, here's Finland. Finland does so well. What we don't compare are the wages of salaries of teachers in Finland and how well, if you value your teachers this much, then you put your money where your mouth is and you pay teachers, the value. And another incentive that it could possibly work could be loan forgiveness. If I take out my student loan and I pursue this, students who pursue teaching for a particular number of years, perhaps they can get their student loans forgiven. We know you can't file bankruptcy anymore for student loans. And I just wanted to, in this discussion, point to something that President Sirata talked about. Liberal arts eventually catches up. Liberal arts eventually catches up if you pursue a master's degree in something else. Maybe in an MBA or something like that. We have to be honest about this. And I always joke about with my students in the past that in my undergrad degree in mathematics, my favorite course was in Shakespeare. I would run away and make sure I always sat into the literature class and Shakespeare class because I just loved the use of language. And perhaps it helped me with my analytical thinking and analytical skills, the way they would interweave language from one scene to the next. But the reality here is if you pursue a degree in a career in teaching, or you pursue a degree or career in social work or in some of the other liberal arts, you're going to have significant difficulty in repaying student loans. And there's data that demonstrates that. So, and if you pursue the bachelor's degree in social work, you have to have the master's or above in order to get the starting salary of someone who would have pursued a 2-year associate's degree in a STEM field. So when we're talking to our students, we have to let them know that, okay, I might have pursued a liberal arts degree and I might have been successful, but here's where the bulk of the data lies. I can't use P. Diddy as an example of a college dropout from Howard University and say, well, okay, college dropouts make it. You can't use the exception to prove the rule. And the rule generally says, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to have masters, you're going to have a little bit more. We're not necessarily saying don't pursue it, just have that information of the consequences.
Thank you. I do want to open up the panel to questions from all of you. So be thinking about your questions. I'm going to ask one more open question for the panelists. and then I will be turning to you and seeing if you have any questions. So we're facing a change in the administration. We know we're facing that change at a time that we have these other challenges. Do you see anything that is likely to change and will help us either or hurt us as we move forward trying to increase the degree attainment level of our population?
Yeah. I'll begin. My concerns are with regards to federal Pell Grants. We're seeing as this population shifts, we're seeing that 60% of K through 12 students in the state of Texas are on free and reduced lunch, which means that these students will be eligible for Title IV Pell Grants as they come forward. We saw increases throughout the state and nation when the Obama administration implemented summer Pell. We saw huge increases, not just in enrollment, we saw significant increases in completion rates because the data is overwhelming. If we get students to go during the summer, they're going to be successful. The issue is they've exhausted their funds, their financial aid during the fall and spring and can't afford to go during the summer. My concern is, if there will be proposed cuts to federal Pell Grants at a time when we're seeing poorer and poorer students come into higher education, and that opportunity may diminish based on the cost of education.
Just two things that concern me about the new transition. One positive, one negative. I'll just start with a negative first so we can end on a positive note. With the negative, I'm concerned about preferential access to colleges through affirmative action. In the recent past, there's been a drive towards saying that, perhaps we should focus on low income and not necessarily Black and Hispanic. But if you want diversity, and if you want Black and you want Hispanic, you actually have to go get Black and Hispanic in order to have your representation in higher ed. If you cast a wide net, you're going to get diversity in terms of urban and rural, but you're not necessarily going to get people of color. So that's one of the things we have to concern ourselves about. Yes, there's rural and urban America, and there's disparities, and but if you want to get race, you have to actually go after race. And one of the positive things that I'm looking at would be perhaps the investment in infrastructure. Everybody's talking about this $1 trillion investment in infrastructure that we're going to have that's going to restore our nation's bridges and roads. Well, the majority of those jobs that come from that will be for middle-skill jobs. And that middle-skill job boom is certainly going to represent a boom for community colleges and schools that provide training and education in the middle. So associate's degrees, technical degrees, if you're able to churn those students out quickly and get them prepared for those jobs, and that should also represent, a positive way for our students in their future.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, we're hopeful. It's a new administration, so we are happy to work with the new Department of Education and on those issues of common interest. I would say that we are interested that the Elementary Secondary Education Act was reauthorized just a year ago. ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, it was 7 years in the making. And a lot of bipartisan work went into that bill, and so we are certainly hopeful that commitment to Title I dollars will continue, and we will continue with the implementation of the new ESSA law. Also, we want to see the continuation of IDEA and support from the federal government to help our neediest kids in our public schools.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the audience now. Do any of you have any questions either for me or for the panelists? If you do, Peace will bring you a microphone. We have one over here. Peace.
Hi, I'm Matt Dembitsky from Community College Daily. I have a question about college costs. We talked about that factor, touched about a little bit Pell Grants. But Dr. Smith, you were mentioning how you provide access to other types of institutions. Even if you perhaps are in the middle class, how do you afford these colleges when first year of college costs you $20,000? That's just the first year at a middle class college.
Well, the first year at Georgetown costs a little bit more than that. But the biggest challenge for people in repaying college is non-completion. So for students who have not completed and you've not been able to get that job, then those are the students that default on their loans. So I think this performance-based funding and performance indicator discussions that we've been having outside of this room should represent a move in the right direction to get colleges and universities to recognize that it's really important to make that connection outside of graduation. When your students leave, you need to make sure that they get a job that pays, and certainly they get a job that can, allows them to take care of themselves and their families and pay off those student loans. But you don't necessarily, my center, we've never necessarily advocated only going to the Georgetowns and, the Western governors and these types of schools. We've advocated across the board. So the colleges that start at $3,000-4,000 per year, and those that start at $30,000 or $40,000 per year, depending on what your needs and your resources are. The concern is, can you get a job that covers it, and can you get a job that pays it? And that's an answer for both community colleges and our four-year colleges and universities, as well as the individuals and the choices and decisions they make about the majors they choose.
Yeah, I think that more and more, based on the cost of education, the missing piece that we never speak to is the massive cuts in state appropriations with regards to higher education. So in 1984, 72% of my budget was state appropriations. Today it's 23% and falling. So that's the piece that's always left out of the conversation. And so I believe, and I'm very grateful for the 23%, but I think that if our states realize the importance of higher education, that becomes a funding priority. And yes, I'm part of a performance-based funding system. 10% of my funding is based on performance. The number of students that hit certain metrics and milestones, including graduation and transfer, are part of that. I accept that readily and look forward to continuing to improve success rates. But I do think that more and more, as the costs rise due to cuts in funding, more and more students will be going to open access and community colleges, and we have a responsibility to improve our outcomes.
Can I just,
Please.
I'd like to underscore something that has been brought up here already a couple of times, and that's the importance of counseling. In our K-12 world, that is vitally important to prepare students for college, to make sure they are making good decisions, that they are on track to follow through on those decisions, that they know about financial aid, they know exactly how much it's going to cost, they know where they can get money. They can have help with the choice of majors, but this is something that really should begin as early as middle school. Start making those plans so that even their high school is helping to prepare them, and that their families, especially these first-generation college goers, that they understand the drill, how to navigate that whole admissions process and the financial aid process, so we can help make sure the kids are prepared, they know what to expect, they can afford it, they complete it. I just want to mention, however, that in some of our neediest school districts, we have guidance counselors who may have a caseload of 500 or more students. That's insane. We need to do better than that to get more counseling, more mentors in to help kids make better plans and be better prepared, not just for the academics of college work, but to how to pay for it.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Yes. Enlightened self-interest is something that this report really speaks to. Yet there seems to be a tipping point for institutions. I'd be interested in hearing the perspectives about what cultivates this enlightenment so that institutions see the opportunity.
Well, and let me do a quick comment, because certainly we know that as state appropriations are cut on a per-student basis, institutions become much more tuition-driven. They need to bring in tuition dollars, which means they need to attract students. And as the demographics are changing, they need to attract more Black and brown students and Asian students. And if they don't do that, they will have excess capacity at a time when they can ill afford it. So to ask the other panelists to comment on, I know when I was a college president, that really forced me to be very aware of who was out there who could go to college but isn't, and how can I get them to enroll and complete. Other thoughts?
Yeah, From my perspective, it is very much self-serving with regards to the budget, but it's also self-serving with regards to, to facilitating the American dream. It is just overwhelming that the only pathway to the middle class is through higher education. And so we have to ensure that more of these students, first-generation students, minority students, are taking advantage and the opportunity to go to college and complete college. There's about an 80% correlation between educational attainment and wages. And therefore, to improve the quality of life of our particular regions, then we need to be serving more students. It's not just, as a former enrollment management, it's not just for the sake of the numbers. It's very much in order to fulfill their dreams, in order to fulfill their living wage aspirations, not minimum wage aspirations.
A full third of our students who enrolled in colleges and universities in this country are over the age of 30. And for many of them, this is the first time they've ever, encountered any higher ed. It's 30 and over. I think we have to be really concerned that our challenges are not only trying to get that student out in terms of making sure they pick the right courses and they pick the right major, but also, making that college experience something that is doable for them. We have a report at our center called Working Learners that shows that 70% of all our college students are working now, some of them 30 and 40 hours per week. And the challenge for them is not necessarily the counseling and getting the right courses and knowing which ones to do, but it's just, taking care of their kids, taking care of their family, making sure they can get to work on time, and juggling all of these challenges that they have. So, particularly for this population that we're going to face in the future, low income, first generation students of color, we have to recognize that, some of them are going to be parents themselves. And, we have to understand that maybe we need to be flexible in course offerings and when we offer it and how we offer it. So, that's one of our concerns, to make sure that we really pay attention to the composition of the classroom, and we make changes to our delivery based on our students.
I want to thank Dr. Smith for bringing up that point about adult learners, because of course our report talks about high school graduates, not the number of people entering college, and we know that an increasing percentage every year really are those adult learners, and that's a great opportunity both for those individuals and for those institutions. Other questions?
Yes, good morning. Jamal Abdul-Alim, reporter with Diverse Issues in Higher Education. One of the things I was hoping you could you touched on it, but maybe elaborate on, is the implications for institutional aid. Based on the trends that we see in the report, what do you predict is going to happen in terms of institutional aid by different groups? And if you could speak to colleges and universities about what should happen, what would you say? Thank you.
Yeah, I assume you mean institutional aid, that's provided by the institutions to their students as opposed to the Pell grants. Yes, and what we've seen, of course, is that institutions have more dollars to give. In fact, they're giving or increasing the amount they give to students far more quickly than either federal or state support, but they're taking it from other students. So it's sort of, you get the full-pay students to help subsidize those who can't. And what's happening now is the proportions are shifting so dramatically. There's not enough full-pay students. I mean, I used to say as a college president, if I just had one student who I could charge tuition of $10 million, then I could provide assistance for all these others. But my problem is I have 80% of students with need and 20% of students who are paying, frankly, fairly modest tuition. So there's not the resources there for the smaller schools, for the community colleges and the regional comprehensives. There may be, of course, at the much better funded, at the, with the significant endowments, the large selective institutions. I don't know if you want to add to that.
As a community college president, most community colleges, including mine, have very small foundations and very small. We have them focused specifically on scholarship dollars. 70% of my students are first-generation college students. 85% are Hispanic Latino. 87% of my first-time in college students are on some type of financial aid, of which 97% are on either Pell or scholarship. I don't have a lot of dollars. What we're focused on is providing scholarship opportunities for the students that aren't on aid or that are on aid that isn't quite enough. Full Pell covers more than twice my tuition and fees. So if I can get more and more, what we're doing for that is doing FAFSA nights in the community. We lead the state in FAFSA applications, providing that opportunity not just to apply to our institution, any institution that they choose to, but so that they qualify for that financial aid. There are institutions, my undergraduate and Dr. Affirmative flagship institution, I know that there are more institutional dollars than federal aid, but I don't have the expertise to speak on how they distribute them.
And just quickly, there's a question on the FAFSA form which asks, what do you expect your contribution from your family to be? What's your family contribution? And African Americans and Hispanic students, in the majority, that's over 50%, often write 0 in that box. So, and that's 0 is honestly because they just don't have the resources from their family to assist them with that. That question you're asking is for me a particularly hard question because for the private institutions who have the endowments and have that a lot of them have been advocating making those endowments available to all of their students and making sure that the tuition for the most part is covered by the institution once you enroll, but it's still not as universal as we would hope. I just think that the only way we can continue to do that is to advocate for it and push for it and make sure that the students, as long as you've satisfied the enrollment requirement, that you find some way of paying, because there are too many institutions that are just have tuitions that are just too high for the average students to cover. I went to a meeting recently where there was a state discussion where some states were actually limiting their own students in their state with the intent to attract students from other states so that they can get the out-of-state tuition and be able to pay tuition. I think we need to figure out ways of making sure that colleges and universities don't circumvent that process, and they, in fact, are obligated to train and educate the students in your own state and not necessarily, just tackle out-of-state dollars.
Other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, I want to first thank the panelists for being here. Really appreciate adding your perspective that I think helps us really establish some context. Why is this report relevant? So I really want to thank you for being here. I really also want to thank the co-authors, Demi Mikelau and Peace Brandsburg at WICHE. They have been sweating blood over this report for a very long time. I'm hoping that Demi will someday relax, come down just a bit. And I want to thank ACT and particularly the College Board. College Board has provided so much support, not just financial support, but a great deal of advice about how best to do this and how best to use it. So thank you very much for that, and thank you all for being here. I do encourage you to go online and look at the web tool. You can get a lot of information about your particular region, your particular state. Again, you'll see dramatic variations among them, but what we all know is that we are becoming an increasingly diverse nation. We do know that our diverse students are less likely to enroll in college, and certainly less likely to enroll in the more selective institutions that have the resources to support them. We know that our workforce really depends on us providing more educated workers, so we all have to recommit to working together to make sure that that happens. Again, this is a matter of economic survival for our institutions. It's a matter of global competitiveness for our nation. Thank you all very much.